Hey everyone, my name is Nico Carver, and if you are new to my channel is all about deep sky imaging and looking at the gear astrophotographers use, how we use that gear, and then how we plan for taking images and process those images once we've gathered some data. Today's video is going to be all about planning for taking a deep sky photograph. And so this assumes that you already sort of know a bit about the gear that you want to use. But other than that, I'm going to keep it pretty general and just talk about some of the planning tools, like things like planetariums and atlases and surveys and catalog data and all that kind of stuff that we use to pick an object and also to know how best to approach that object. Is it going to be something that works better in LRGB or one-shot color, or is it going to be more something that you would use a narrowband approach like this nebula behind me, which is in Cygnus and is not photographed too often. So that's another thing that hopefully you'll get out of this video, is how to find things that you're not seeing every day. And basically, we're going to look at the different tools and how I use them. Most of them are free. There's a mix of online programs and also downloadable software. And generally, we're going to start with the browsing tools. So how do you find an object? And sometimes you'll just look at the photographs of other astrophotographers, and there's a number of websites that are good for that. Other times, especially when you're looking for something a little rarer, you might look through catalogs or just a survey, like the Digitized Sky Survey, for regions that you might like. After we look through the browsing section of tools, we'll move on to the framing section. So once you have sort of picked an object, how do you know how to frame it? For that, you need to figure out your particular field of view. So we'll look at a few ways to either calculate that or actually just put in your gear, and then it gives you a nice frame of view reticule right on top of the imagery. And once we have that, we can think about, well, what is the best approach here? Is it going to be just a single frame or doing a mosaic image, things like that? After we look at framing, and part of that is visualization, how to sort of think about, is this object going to be bright enough, too dim? We'll move on to finding out the ideal sub-exposure length, which actually in the most times is not based on your object, but actually based on your local sky conditions. So once you've picked an object, you understand how you're going to frame it and how long you're going to do your sub-exposures for. The only thing that's left is coming up with sort of an approach. Do you only want to do like an LRGB image? Are you planning to add H-alpha? Do you want to maybe... So then another approach that I often take is actually just shoot like a few hours of one channel and see how it turns out. So another approach is a little bit less planned out, and take some frames, see how it looks. Maybe you give up on that object entirely if it just seems too hard for your current skill level, or maybe you really get interested in it and continue, or maybe you switch your approaches based on what you're seeing in those frames. So this is going to be a wide range of topics. Most of it is going to be, I'll do video of my screen and just talk through what I'm doing, and hopefully you get something out of it. Before we dive in with the browsing tools, let me just mention my website is at nebulaphotos.com, where you can see all my latest images. And then I will also post all the links relevant to this video on my website. To find that particular web page, look in the description of this video right below here, and it will lead you right to that page. It'll have all the links relevant to what we're talking about today. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe so you can always stay up to date with the videos I'm releasing. I'm trying to do them a lot more often than I have in the past, so keep your eye out. Okay, here we go. So the first section of tools is browsing tools. And the first one that we're going to look at is astrobin.com. And this is probably the website that I use the most for browsing other people's photos. And it's really designed for amateur astrophotographers and around their needs. The owner of the website is really good at addressing what we need here in a website like this one. The purpose of it is really to show off your astrophotography with other people who would be interested. And there's, of course, all of your normal sort of social media features like liking and commenting. But it also does some really cool organizational things. And one aspect of it that I like is when you start following other people. So I'll just show you what I mean here. So I'm following these 215 different people. You can, of course, go into their particular pages. And most of the people that I follow shoot things that are somewhat similar to what I shoot. So it gives me new ideas and approaches. So I'll just click on one here. So you can see there's a lot of cool wide field nebula regions here. And let's say that you find one that you really like and you want to remember, I want to come back to this because one day I'm going to shoot this object at a nice wide field like this. You can hit this little bookmark icon, and then it adds that image to your personal bookmarks. So I use that a lot. I also will remove bookmarks if it's something I've already imaged and don't feel like returning to anytime soon. So maybe I've now done this blue horse head, and so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to unbookmark it. So this is just one of the aspects of the site that I really like. I can then remember, for instance, this I know is somewhere in Orion, I think. Yeah. And so I want to come back to this little Boogeyman Nebula and do it this winter, but I'm going to put it in my bookmark so I remember when I get to that season to come to this object. So that's one way I use this, the nice browsing capability in Astrobin to remember things is by adding them to my bookmarks. Another aspect of it is that we can search for things that we might want to do. So I'm going to search for, I think this is an object that I did recently, Sharpless 129. Yep, so this is the Flying Bat Nebula. So you can see all the different images of it here on Astrobin and sort of see what people used. It's a good way to get sort of a handle on what kind of gear you might need to approach a certain object. Like if I change this one to say only people who shot it with DSLRs. Let's see what comes back. Okay, so there's, not nearly as many results when I search for DSLR, and I can sort of see what kind of results come back. And I can see, that's sort of a cool image, but it doesn't come across nearly as strong because Sharpless 129 is probably something you'd want to approach with narrowband filters. So you need a CCD or CMOS camera to do it well. So this just gives you an idea. It's a very easy site to use. Another thing I often explore is just, there's 3 different actually sort of views that I explore a lot just to give me sort of quick ideas for browsing. One is the front page here. The front page shows me new images from everyone that I follow, plus images that have been recently liked by people that I follow. So this just gives you a really good variety. And another one I like is if you go up here to explore and choose top picks. These are ones that have been picked recently by just a group of users whose who are sort of the judges for the site. It rotates through different users doing this, but it just gives you an idea of some often really cool objects that you haven't seen before. So for instance, here's a cool a supernova remnant in Cassiopeia. You may have never seen that before, and then if you like that, you can go ahead and bookmark it and return to it later. And then the big wall, this is the last thing I often look at. This just shows you everything being uploaded to the site. So if you just really want a broad idea of all the different astrophotography going on here, this isn't going to be super specific to your interests. So for instance, you see there's a lot of lunar and planetary here, which is something I don't do that often. But it just gives you an idea. And a lot of times you can find people that are sort of at your current level this way. Because I don't want you to get discouraged thinking, everyone is way ahead of you, because you do see a lot of really excellent astrophotography on this website. But you can really keep it sort of at the level that you're at and just follow people who are sort of on your path, and then you'll see each other getting better. It's a really fun website too if you're interested in sort of the social dynamics of astrophotography online. I, of course, also encourage you to join any kind of local club you have available to you. All right, that's enough on Astrobin. I'm going to move on here to DSO Browser, which does have some of the same features that Astrobin has. It does have the ability to upload your photography on here. I haven't done that yet, just because it takes time to upload to all these different places, but maybe someday I will. What I use it for, though, is it's just a really nice quick view of the current weather at my site, the moon phase right there, over there on the left. And here in the center column, what it shows you is some popular deep sky objects that are in your sky tonight. So it uses geolocation services through the browser to find out where you are. But you can also make a free account, like I have here, and just tell it your exact coordinates, which will be even more accurate. The other thing that's cool when you add your own account is you can input some of your equipment, and I'll show you what that does. So let's say I was interested in shooting the Veil Nebula tonight. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it gives me a bunch of cool information over here on the right, like the hourly elevation and in which direction it's going to transit. So I can see this is going to be almost at the zenith, 81 degrees at around 9:30 tonight, and then it'll start setting, and by about 2 a.m. it'll be too low for me, because at around 40 degrees I'm below the tree line at my property. So that looks like a good object for me tonight, and I can actually see that right now it is mid-September, and this is the best time of the year to shoot the Veil. Okay, and then if I keep scrolling down here, it has this telescope simulator, and this uses imagery from Aladdin. That's what that little symbol is right down there, which is basically just free software. You can get it for your own computer and download it if you'd rather work offline, and it serves up the digitized sky survey imagery. It's a really nice program to use, and a lot of different online tools use it because it's a free license to use that imagery through Aladdin. So what this shows me is real imagery. This is again from the digitized sky survey, which was started at Palomar, and it was done with glass plates in red and blue. But it gives me a real idea of what the photos might look like once I take them here. And I can move this reticule around. And what this reticule is showing me is my actual equipment. So it says here, your telescopes, your cameras. And the reason that it has that information is because I've put it in here with my free account into my equipment. So as soon as you add that onto the site, it becomes available right here in the telescope simulator. So I can go to any object in the night sky. I can see some amateur finished images of it. And I can also get an idea for how it would look in my sensor. And if I wanted to, move this reticule around, I can change the orientation here and see, that'd look cool vertical like that, fit in the whole Pickering's triangle and the witch's broom there. Or if I wanted to just sort of focus on this part of the veil, the western veil, I could frame it up like that. So this is a really nice tool. You can get all kinds of information about how high it will rise in your sky that night. You can see some amateur images of it, and you can lastly simulate your field of view with the object right there, all on the same page. Let me see what else you can do here. So if I go back to searching, I'm going to search deep sky objects here. There's a bunch of filters you can also adjust that give you a cool idea. So I'm going to say I only want to see things that are at a minimum of 30 degrees for at least 2 hours and are at least 40 degrees away from the moon. I only want to see bright nebula, dark nebula, and diffuse nebula. And that's all I'll put in for now. I could put in, different apparent magnitude, apparent size things here. That might be useful, but for now I'm just going to leave it at that. And it shows me all these different nebula here and when they're coming up. And what I'm looking for usually is I don't want to stay up this late. That one is not going to get to a good point until around 3:30 a.m. So that one doesn't look too good. But let's look at this one here. Actually, that's a little small. You can see how big it is right there. 8 degrees. That's quite big, actually. Never mind. Let me actually look at that one. Not really sure what it is. So sometimes the amateur images won't give you much of an idea. Somewhere in Cygnus, but there's a lot of nebulae in there. And even the telescope simulator doesn't give me much of an idea. What that tells me is that whatever this object is, Sharpless 118, is really, really dim. Because if I'm not seeing exactly what it is in these amateur images, and I also can't see it down here in the telescope simulator, that tells me it's a really dim challenge object. Now, that doesn't mean it's not doable, especially with narrowband filters. So now what I might do is I might just do a Google image search for it here. Sharpless 118. That looks like it might be it. Okay, so that looks like actually a pretty cool object that I haven't seen many images of. So I might then add that to my list. If I want to do that with DSO Browser, all you do is you go over here and you click this little Add to Observing List. And then it becomes part of my observing list. Really easy. And you can export that or print it out or do whatever you want. You can even import it into one of these tools, Astrophotography Tool or Sequence Generator Pro. So really nice tool. I'm going to stop now, but there's probably a lot more I could say about it. You can search for objects right over here. Just all kinds of different features available in this. It even has a planetarium built into it. So a lot of times people who are new to astrophotography, they will give them the advice to download Stellarium, use that to find objects. I actually don't give that advice anymore. I would say start with DSO Browser. It really just gives you so much that you can do right here in this web tool. When I am just browsing a certain sort of constellation for ideas, I often go to, though, a different implementation of Aladdin Online, which is Blackwater Skies Imaging Toolbox. I also use this as one of my primary framing tools. The reason I like it is it's just very quick. Unlike DSO Browser, which has tons of features, this basically just does one thing really well, which is it gives you the DSS imagery. It loads it really fast. You can quickly move around the sky, zoom in and out. If you have a trackpad like I do, you just sort of do a 2-finger swipe in here to zoom in on something, zoom out on something. What it doesn't do is it doesn't have labels for the object, so that's something that's a little weird, but you can always search for something. So once you know the name of something, you can just search for it here. So I'm going to do, let's say, NGC 7000. That's the North America Nebula. Hit go. Brings you right to it. And you can zoom in on it. You can zoom out on it. As you zoom in, it provides more detail, shows you all the cool stars in there. As you zoom out, you can see more. And right now, I am actually working in this area of the sky. I just started by going to Cygnus like this and just sort of scrolling around. And I had already done a mosaic of this area with a 200 millimeter lens. Didn't really finish it, but I started it. So I sort of knew what that area was about. I've shot North America and Pelican before, but I was looking for something a little bit different this time. So I was looking sort of at some of these other nebulas in here, and I saw this area right here, and I got really interested in this because I liked how this part right up here sort of looks like the veil, right? It looks like the witch's broom part of the veil with that really bright star sort of embedded and these cool wispy parts in here. And then I liked this down here with these this nice double, this like blue star and a nice reddish yellow star. And then even down here, this is really interesting. All these little veil-like structures, and there's like sort of an X right there. So I decided I'm going to mosaic this whole part of the sky right here, down to the propeller and up to this part up here. But to understand what kind of thing I'm undertaking then, I can actually use the framing tools within this imaging toolbox. So we're going to move right into framing. This was sort of the end of browsing. So again, just to review, I use Astrobin to find amateur images. You can find ones that have gear similar to your own. I use DSO Browser, which just sort of is a catch-all tool. It does everything, including weather, planetarium, all kinds of stuff. And then I use this imaging toolbox just when I'm sort of, I know I want to find something a little bit off the beaten track, so I just sort of move around in a constellation that I know has a lot of interesting objects and find something. This section of sky right here doesn't have a name. This little object right down there is called the Propeller Nebula. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this to do a rough idea of a mosaic. And the first thing you want to do here is you go up here to equipment and you can pick your particular camera. I'm just going to hit Z on my keyboard to go down to the Z's. There's the ZWO cameras, and I'm going to pick the ZWO 1600. That's my camera. For scope, it may have your particular scope in here. It does have a bunch of them. I know from looking before that it doesn't have the Stellar View 86 in here yet, so I'm just going to pick something similar. Hit calculate. So that's actually not that similar. The focal length of that scope is 630. The focal length of my scope is 464. So I'm now going to fix that. And you can see it's not selectable in there. So you go down to the next button right here, This lets you change specific information. So pixel width, pixel height, these are all from my camera, the ZWO1600, so these are all correct. But the focal length here and the aperture are not, because I didn't have my scope, so I'm just going to go ahead and input these. 464 for the focal length and 86 for the aperture, and recalculate. So now what it's showing me is an actual field of view. This is basically the same thing as using a field of view calculator. But the nice thing here is that it shows me with actual imagery and this green box they call the reticule. And right now it's in locked mode, meaning if I try to zoom in or out, it's not going to let me. It's locked to this field of view, but I can still move the background imagery underneath it to pick out different areas of the sky here. So I could see there's the propeller, that looks pretty nice. And if I was just doing a single image, I would probably do something like that, because that looks like a really cool image with this nebula feature going across diagonally like that, and then that nice pair of stars right up there in the corner. But, oh, and by the way, sometimes you'll see these lines or other artifacts there's like a reflection from some kind of mirror and a central obstruction. Sometimes you'll see those in this DSS imagery. It's not going to actually show up in your images. Just know that those are just artifacts from the process of getting this digitized sky survey done. Okay, what was I going to say? Oh, one other thing you can get from this website right here that's really nice is it tells you, I'm going to zoom in on this, the size of your field of view. So I can see that the size of my field of view is 2.15 degrees wide by 1.63 degrees high. And my image scale is 1.67 arc seconds per pixel. So this is important for figuring out things, with the printed Sky Atlas. This is how I know the size of my field of view is from this right here. I could then translate that and make a cool overlay. But image scale is important for other reasons. I typically like to go somewhere between 1 arc second per pixel and 2 arc second per pixel for my image scale. Some people are like to be under 1 arc second per pixel or around 1. Generally, the rule of thumb is that around 1 arc second per pixel is going to give you a really nice sampling rate. But you can read more about that somewhere else. I'm not going to go much more into it in this video. Okay, so what can we do now if I know that I don't want to just get a single image of this area of sky? I actually want to do a mosaic. I want to see about how many panels is that going to take. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and I want this mosaic feature. But before I do that, I'm actually going to unlock this reticule by clicking on this little maximize button, turn that off. So I can zoom out and see the whole thing here. And just sort of see, do you think it would be better to turn this? I think I could do this in fewer panels if I turn this reticule a little bit this way. So I'm going to use this rotate feature to turn it a little bit. And then I can just sort of see, oh yeah, so I could do this in 2 panels across this way and a few panels across this way, that way. So I'm going to start this mosaic up here. And then I'll go into this feature and I'll make a copy. And I'm going to go ahead and move that with these little buttons down here. And again, this is just a rough idea, and I can make some more copies here.
And another one, just to give me an idea of about how many panels is this going to take for my project. Okay, so after doing that a little bit, it looks like maybe I can do it in 6 panels. But then when I look a little bit closer, I'm going to zoom in here, I'm thinking, oh, actually that's cutting that part off a little bit. When I look down here, it's very close to cutting off the propeller. So that's not giving me much leeway. So I ended up rotating this whole thing a little bit and doing it in 8 panels, and that's working out much better. So it gives you a quick idea just by sort of copying these little reticules about how many panels it might take to do a mosaic. When it comes down to it, I use Sequence Generator Pro's Mosaic Wizard to actually generate this. But again, this is just for planning purposes. Now, let's say you've generated this and you just sort of want to remember that that's your rough plan. You can then go over here to Save and Share, and you could either create a link if you're sort of sharing this with, maybe you're on an imaging team and you want to share it with other people on your team, you could do that. Or what I do is I do this PNG export, and it gives me a quick export of that area. Now, it just does it at whatever zoom level you're currently at. So this gives me sort of a wide view of that area of sky, and I could save that image. Or I could zoom in a little bit here. Too much. There we go. Sorry. And that gives me a more zoomed in view. It didn't do that perfectly because I cut it off a little bit there, but you get the idea. So whatever zoom level you're currently at, it can generate a PNG image of that zoom level. Okay, so I use this a lot. It gives me a quick idea of imaging targets. One thing that you'll notice is that when I zoom out here, this area of sky is pretty dim compared to, for instance, the North American Nebula or this area around Satyr. And if I go to something really bright, I'm going to do, let's see here, Orion Nebula. You can see that is completely blown out in this DSS imagery. So it really does give you a relative scale for how dim a particular imaging object is. For instance, I know over here, there's the Witchhead Nebula. You can see that just sort of barely shows up, while the Orion Nebula is completely blown out. The Horsehead and Flame are somewhere sort of in the middle there. So it gives you a really nice relative idea of the brightness of different objects because these were all taken with the same exposures, same equipment. And so I really like this for comparison purposes too. If you're looking for the brightest objects, you can quickly browse through here and find ones that are blown out like this. Another example would be the Andromeda Galaxy. So you can see the core is completely blown out there. Even the outer parts of it are pretty bright. What are some other really bright ones? Let's try M33. That's a pretty bright galaxy. It's maybe a little bit more of a challenge in light pollution, but still a pretty nice bright object. Okay, so I think I've explained this enough. There are some other features here that I didn't go into.
When I'm want to get some time off my computer and just sort of relax, I turn to a printed Sky Atlas. Now, it took me a few tries to find one that worked well for astrophotography. When I did, the name was pretty obvious actually. It's the Astrophotography Sky Atlas by Charles Bracken. The reason this one works so much better than other Sky Atlases, printed Sky Atlases, for astrophotography purposes is because Bracken actually plots the real size and shape of the objects right onto the stars. And so many other catalogs don't actually do this. They use a generic like circle shape, which just varies a little bit in size for nebulae, and use a generic oval shape for galaxies or something like that. Well, a lot of times you want to know the orientation of the shape to know how that's going to fit best within your sensor. So this one is really good. It also lists way more objects that may be interesting to imagers, including lots of objects that you can only do with narrowband filters. These things are usually omitted from normal sky atlases because they're so hard to do visually that they're just of no interest to visual observers. The one thing that I have done to make this more useful to me is I printed this. This is clear transparency, so it's called transparency film. It was used a lot in older classrooms when you had the overhead projector, but you can still find it. And it works best if you can get access to a color laser printer. That's how I printed mine here. Probably if you go to like a print shop, they could do it for you, and for not too much money. And I'll put a template of what I created here on my website, so you can use that to start. But basically, what I did was I took my field of view, which from some of these other tools in the video, you know how to calculate, and I converted it so that it would be at the same scale as this book. And then I took that for some of the different cameras and scopes and lenses that I use the most often, and I put it as a single frame, but also as different mosaics that I might use. And so now what this allows me to do is I can put that right on the page there, and I can see, oh, look, the Flaming Star Nebula fits perfectly with my 1600 and my SBQ86. But if I use my Canon 5D, I could put the Flaming Star and the tadpoles all into one frame. Or I could do the same thing with a 4-panel mosaic with my 1600, which I might want to use because that has the narrowband filters. So this is really useful. I can also quickly rotate it. And the really nice thing about using a Sky Atlas, other than getting away from the screen, is that it fits a lot more information onto one page. This is actually pretty dense. With print, you can get something like 600 or 800 DPI pretty easily. With a screen, that's not possible yet. So they fit a lot of information, a lot of stars, and into a fairly small, compact space. What that means is that I get a huge amount of sky. I get like a whole constellation worth of sky on one page. While if I'm looking on a digital Sky Atlas, it's very hard to do that and still get a sense for the shape of the deep sky objects. So this is really nice for just looking through a constellation and picking out the objects I might want to photograph. Again, it is called the Astrophotography Sky Atlas by Charles Bracken. I think it's about $30 new in paperback, and I'll put a link on my website.
Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this video is coming up with an imaging plan, and part of that is understanding what you're going to set your camera settings to, so how long you're going to expose for and things like that. Part of this is just doing research online, so if you use a popular camera model, you can probably find out what other people are doing. For instance, for this ZWO 1600, a good rule of thumb is a gain of 75 for LRGB, a gain of 200 for the narrowband, and generally in a light polluted area like I have, I do 1 minute exposures for the LRGB and 5 minute exposures for the narrowband. And you can find all that kind of information online. It's a really sort of common thing that people do. If you're a really technical person, though, or you're just interested in figuring this out for your particular camera, because each model might be a little bit different, and each even sort of copy of that camera might be a bit different. There's some technical information that you can figure out using PixInsight's scripts up here. I'm not going to go into all of this in this video, but I just want to show you where this is in case you're interested. And of course, you can find more information online. There's lots of threads on cloudy nights and things like that. But under script instrumentation, there's these couple different scripts right here, basic CCD parameters that can give you, if you take your normal calibration frames, flat frames, bias frames, dark frames, it can tell you a bunch of information about the read noise and stuff like that of your camera. With that information, plus a picture of your sky condition, so just a picture of your sky, doesn't have to be of a particular object. Actually, you don't want it to. You just want it of a random patch of sky. You can go back into that instrumentation and do this calculate sky limited exposure and use a background image of your sky plus the information you've figured out about your camera and figure out what is the minimum ideal sub-exposure length for your particular sky conditions. And believe it or not, this is most of the time not based on how bright the object is, but only based on how bright your sky is and what camera you're using. The only time I can say that you really want to vary your sub-exposure length based on the object that you're shooting is with really bright objects when you're trying to capture the core part of them, like Orion and Andromeda and things like that. Okay, another way that's even simpler of figuring out a good sub-exposure length I have found is that when you're taking a picture and you see what it looks like in its linear state, here's an example of one of my linear pictures. This is at H alpha, and you can see that I've clipped the cores of a number of stars in this frame. And I usually let that happen. I'm not a huge stickler on making sure that I clip no star cores. Some people are. You might be one of them. So if you are, just ignore that I have all of these little clipped stars in here. But basically, in a linear state, you're not seeing the object yet. You're just where the object is just going to be completely black in the linear state. But you might be seeing some clipped star cores if you are okay with that. But the more important thing here is no matter what program you're using to capture, it probably has a histogram feature. I'm just showing you this in PixInsight, but normally you would find this in Sequence Generator Pro or Astrophotography Tool or Backyard EOS or whatever it is. And I found this is the easiest way to just sort of quickly judge, am I in the right ballpark for this sub-exposure length? Sometimes it can be sort of hard to see if you're clipping whites with the histogram, but like I can't see anything over there showing that I'm clipping whites, but the way that you're clipping the brightest parts of the image are, of course, just by looking at it in its linear state here and seeing that a bunch of star cores are showing up clipped to white even when it's linear. Of course, that only works if you're using a program that can show you that. I think most laptop programs do. If you are someone who only uses the DSLR with no computer attached, this might be more difficult. But if you are one of those just DSLR only users, I'll just give you an even easier way to do exposure, which is the histogram that it's going to show you with a DSLR is going to be a stretched histogram. It's like the histogram of the JPEG after it's been stretched from RAW. So a good rule of thumb is you want this histogram peak to be about right here, 1/4 of the way over from the left. Now, if you were doing this with a CCD or CMOS camera, that's probably going to be overexposed over there because this is showing you right now a raw linear histogram, not a stretched histogram. So I hope that's not confusing to people, but here's the simple way to think about it. DSLR, you want this histogram peak to be over here 1/4 of the way over. With a CCD or CMOS camera that's showing you the actual linear histogram, you don't need it nearly that far over. What I usually go for, I'm going to zoom in here, is just I want a little bit of separation over here from the very left-hand side. As long as I have that, I'm not going to be clipping too many of the blacks in the image. And so you just need a little separation, and then you should see a very narrow histogram spike like this, especially if you're shooting with a mono camera. Just to show you that, you know, this has a lot of data in it, I'll just show you how I stretch here. So I'm just going to bring this mid slider over a little bit and apply it. And I'll do that again. Okay, so you can see the data coming out. Then I'm going to go ahead and just sort of reset the black level here by bringing this one over. And you can see down here in the shadows, I'm clipping approximately 131 out of, I don't know, 5 million pixels. So I'm not too concerned about that. I'm just sort of getting it into the right ballpark here. But if I kept bringing this over, and now it's showing me I'm clipping 14,000 pixels, that might be a bit too much. So I usually cool it off a little bit then. Okay, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and reset the black level here. Okay, so I have a nicer contrast there. It's still, though, not quite bringing that out quite enough. I'm going to try to usually bring this histogram peak right here over to about 1/4. So I'm going to bring this over a little bit more. And each time we do that, you can see it brings it off that left edge. But what that means is that each time we do that, we're going to have to reset our black level a little bit. Okay. I'm used to working with stacked data. This is just a single frame, so that's why I wasn't quite seeing what I wanted here. There's still a lot of noise in the background, so it's not going to be perfect, but you get the idea. This is now a stretched single frame, just sort of showing you what's there. And this is what you would actually use to evaluate focus when you are imaging. Most programs give you a nice readout of your stars, but you can also always zoom in on them. And I just like doing this because eventually if you zoom in on your stars enough times, you'll get used to seeing what is good focus versus bad focus, you know, just slightly out of focus. It's really hard to evaluate good focus zoomed all the way out like this. This could be, you know, slightly out of focus and would look to me the exact same as if it was in really good focus. But when I zoom in and I look at these dimmer stars, I can tell when they're in focus or not. All right, so ideal sub-exposure length, let me just review it a little bit. If you're really technical, there are some scripts in here under instrumentation in PixInsight that let you figure it out. There are also some calculators online. The problem with the online calculators is that they usually only have the data for older CCD cameras and are not keeping up to date with newer camera models that are coming out. So if you have any kind of newer camera model, you're probably going to have to figure it out yourself and do it using these scripts. But a good rule of thumb for DSLRs is just when you're looking at your histogram, push this peak over 1/4 of the way over. And when you are looking at a CMOS camera or a CCD camera, you want this peak to be just a little bit off the left edge. And when you're looking at the linear data, you don't want too many of your stars to clip. This is probably even too many for some people. I push my data a little bit because I'm often going after pretty dim targets. So I often even do, 10-minute exposures with narrowband at gain 200 because I'm really just trying to get that Nebula feature out of there. And I don't actually care too much about the narrowband stars because these days I'm mostly replacing them with RGB stars anyways. So it all depends on what you're going for. The last thing I want to talk about today, though, is how do you know sort of what you should shoot? And a lot of times it's really challenging because if you want to do something really unique, it's probably never done before by an amateur or maybe just done by a couple. They may be hard to find online. So for instance, this area of the sky, there are very few detailed images of it with all the different narrowband filters included. A lot of imagery of it is just going to be in one-shot color or RGB. So I wasn't sure what the different signal would be for the different narrowband channels. The H alpha is obviously really strong. This is just one 5-minute picture, and you can see it's coming through quite strongly. But if I open up an O3 picture here, of the same region, and I'm just going to do an auto stretch here, you can see that it doesn't look nearly as promising. You can't see much of anything there. This is with a 10-minute exposure. And so sometimes with really challenging objects, a single photograph, a single sub-exposure isn't really going to tell you if it's worth continuing with it. You might have to take multiple hours in some cases. Now, sometimes you know what you're going after. So for instance, when I shot the Squid Nebula, that barely showed up in one sub-exposure, but because I knew it was there, because I've seen all these other great amateur images of it, I knew to keep going. In the case of the O3 signal in this area, I sort of had an idea what was there, but not really. So I just had to just keep shooting it and hoping that something would come of it. I'll show you after a few hours what it looks like. Okay, so after a few hours, just ignore this amp glow on the sides here. I don't know what happened with my calibration, didn't quite work, but if we look a little closer here, you see these little ribs of O3 right there. And there's some in here, obviously. And then also, if we look down here, there's something quite strong right across that star right there. So sometimes it takes a little time to figure out what you want to shoot and if you should continue with it. And a lot of times the things that will be the most challenging are also going to be the most promising because there's a good chance that no one else has done a good image in that particular channel in this part of the sky. So my point here is don't get discouraged. Try out different things. A lot of times you'll find new things along the way on an imaging project. So you can't necessarily plan everything. When you're just starting out, though, especially with just a DSLR, I would really stick to known imaging, good imaging objects. And I'm going to put a list of those up on my website along with the other resources for this video. So, hope this was helpful. This was all about planning, and if you have any questions, just ask them in the comments. Also, if you have any suggestions for future videos, I'd love to hear them. Thanks so much.